Hello and welcome to Deininger Leadership Talk Series. I am Manish Verghese and I head the India business for Deininger Consulting. We are a global executive search firm headquartered out of Frankfurt, Germany. Today we have with us Mr. K.S. Harish. As a quick introduction to Harish for our viewers, Harish is an accomplished HR leader bringing 29 years of experience across varied industries like pharmaceuticals, FMCG, chemicals, engineering and technology sectors. He has worked with both multinationals and Indian organizations and brings varied exposure to business partnering, leadership development, and change management. Of these nearly 3 decades of experience, he has been with Bayer for the last 16 years. In his current role, he leads HR function across South Asia for Bayer, covering markets of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And is responsible for leading the development of nearly 15,000 employees and associates in the region. Harish has a master's in labor studies from the University of Mumbai and followed it up with a diploma in training and development from ISTD. He's also an ICF certified coach. And knowing Harish from earlier, he's an avid sports follower and especially a hockey enthusiast. Harish, once again, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manish. Thank you. Pleasure to be on your call.
Right. And as you know, we are here to have a discussion on the subject of emotional intelligence. And whenever I come across this subject, I think it has only grown in importance and relevance over the years and has become ever so prominent, particularly in the times that we live today. And given that context, that's the reason I thought that it would be interesting to have you with us today to kind of hear your perspectives. To begin with, what does emotional intelligence mean to you in the context of leadership today?
I think the closest word could be empathy. It's about understanding what someone is going through. And this someone could be somebody else, it could be yourself. Right. And many times it is easier for you to empathize with others. It's even more difficult to empathize with yourself. Yeah? And therefore, this element of self-awareness, I think, is an important part of emotional intelligence. It is the ability to be able to gauge how things are around you, how people are reacting to various situations, also anticipating what a reaction is likely to be. So it's a question of empathizing with people and engaging with them with your heart and soul, as well as with your brain.
Right. I mean, interesting. And also from a perspective to say that, often when we talk about, empathy, it inevitably, like you said, tends to be drawn to the fact that it is about empathizing with others. And so it's an interesting take that it's also about, in some ways, internalizing and, having that empathy for yourself. One other facet of emotional intelligence we often treat and talk about is the aspect of self-awareness. And that often has, elements of knowing your own strengths and weaknesses and being aware about those. But to some extent, being also open about it and communicating that externally. But do you think that also, in a way, reveals a certain level of vulnerable side of yours to others and comes in the way of demonstrating the kind of confidence and control you need to exhibit, especially in dealing with situations of conflicts and stressful, situations?
Absolutely, Manish. See, I think I will just add one more element to what you just described.
Right.
It is also being aware about the impact we have on others.
Right.
So the tonality, gestures, body language, all of this are revealing all the time what's going on in the mind. It's not that easy for you to always cover it up. And why? Yeah.
Right.
So it's all about authentic leadership, bringing your full self to work and being yourself.
Yeah.
So, and that is what one would want from senior leaders or leaders in across the levels in the organization, to be able bring your full self to work. And obviously, if you're bringing your full self to work, there are elements where you will be vulnerable. You show your vulnerability. It
Right.
goes a great length in terms of building the bond with your team and really bringing your full leadership potential to life. So I would actually see it as a positive and a strong opportunity for people to show their vulnerability, be able to deal with it as well, and work with the team. It's today it's a lot more about networking and working as communities than being a hierarchical leadership environment. So important for people to see you as a person, the person that you are.
Right. And do you think that in general it allows us to connect up with people more, especially, because, traditionally we've been hierarchical, as organizations, and, it kind of breaks that, barrier that otherwise might exist and makes you a little more approachable and open and human to some extent when you reveal that vulnerable side of yours. Do you think that helps in that?
Absolutely, it does. I have to speak about some of the leaders that I have seen in my company. When they speak up, when they stand up and start with a personal story, and the connection that they are able to establish with the listeners is much, much stronger.
Right.
So this personal stories actually help us connect with the individual who's going through the journey and get to know the person much better. So I guess that's exactly the way to go, to be able to share your personal stories, your experiences, and people can really see you the way you are.
Right, right. Going back to the initial bit that you mentioned about empathy, and it's often spoken about in the leadership context. And when you look around the world today, and given the changes that we're all going through, given that each one of us needs to adapt to so many different things, both on the personal front, but also when it comes to work lives. Do you think, given the fact that, employees at a larger level have had to kind of adapt themselves to things that they were not used to, be it remote working, hybrid work models, increased kind of, work stress in some sense, because there have been blurring lines between personal work lives, and therefore there is a lot of talk about mental health and well-being also coming to center stage. Given this context, do you think leaders, or there is a greater onus on leaders today to demonstrate a higher or greater degree of empathy?
We've been running a series of programs on resilience.
Right.
And we started this journey about 6 or 7 months ago, especially at the time when we in India were going through very difficult and tough times.
Right.
I also had the opportunity to actually facilitate some of these workshops. These workshops were attended by employees and leaders alike. So it was, at the same time when you're attending this workshop along with your colleagues, the openness to talk about what's bothering you, what are your stressors. It really opens up the environment for a very honest conversation.
Right.
Our resilience program was built on the fundamentals of mindfulness. And we also rolled out an app around it so that people can actually log in and record their observations through the day, with a lot of micro practices, for people. So when going back to this discussion that you just mentioned about empathizing and managing your stress around yourself, and especially at a time when with hybrid models and the lines between work and home and personal life is all blurring, it's important for people to get a hang of this entire thing. And for each one, it will be different. There cannot be any prescriptions. Yeah, so for each one, we have to develop our own right balance that works for us. But some ritualization, some micro practices that one can use on a daily basis, they really help. Whether it is with breathing techniques, eating right, sleeping right, exercising right, self-care. I think all of are part of that, those rituals that one can build into your life to, to be able to balance this pressure, work pressure that comes from hybrid working. Policies will always depend upon how the companies see it. So
Right.
you have the extremes from completely flexible to completely mandated and
Right.
many in between.
Yeah.
But the winners in this can only be the individuals who are able to work yourself around what these tasks and asks are.
Right.
I would strongly recommend that leaders, as well as all colleagues in the company, follow these kind of resilience practices, which many times we've forgotten how to breathe. Yeah, and then
Right.
somebody has to again retrain you on how to breathe. Yeah, especially in tough moments, when you have critical moments, when you have conflicts, deeply emotional conversations. And unlike yesterday, where you're just across the table and you can have a heated conversation, and when you walk out of the room, then you go and catch a cup of coffee, and then
Right.
things are back to normal, right?
Yeah.
That it was before the conversation. Now we have to find new ways of dealing with that, especially when you are in the virtual world. You don't have the chance to, pat the person on the back and say, "Come, let's go for a coffee," and then be able to do that discussion over the coffee in a different spirit. So we have
Right.
to find new ways of doing that.
Uh, that's a very interesting perspective that you had, Harish. I'm also kind of drawn to the other side of empathy and compassion, and it stems from the fact that you would see a lot of compassionate leaders, very empathetic, sometimes highly people oriented. But then you often get asked the question, when you're showing a great deal of compassion, empathy towards people, do you have the ability to kind of be assertive and take the tough decisions when it is required? Do you think that in some ways comes in the way for leaders when they are highly people driven to sometimes take those tough calls, especially when the business context is demanding?
All that we are discussing is about how to take those tough calls empathetically. So
Right.
it's not about taking or not taking the tough calls.
Right.
Really being able to empathize and be emotionally intelligent at the time that you're taking that decision and you're communicating it.
Right.
It's being with someone through that process. We are seeing transformation and change all over.
Right.
The moment you mention a word transformation, yeah, it's supposed to be giving some positive vibes. But I wonder, in today's world, does it? Yeah, so the moment you
Right.
see transformation, it probably signals a lot of anxiety amongst people. So it's not a choice whether you transform or you make a change or you take tough decisions either on business or performance related things. It's about how you accompany the colleague in seeing that direction and
Mm.
helping the colleague to be able to overcome that.
Right.
So it's not about making the tough decisions. Tough decisions have to be made,
Yeah.
but it's about how you accompany them, lead them, communicate them, and empathize with the colleague as you go along.
So would you say that you can take tough decisions, but you can, like you said, you can take it empathetically by being empathetic?
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to take those tough decisions because, and that is one thing we've seen across the industry, that decision-making abilities of leaders have gone up.
Yeah.
That they are
Interesting.
able to make quick decisions, sharp decisions. At the same time, what is needed is for us to accompany that with the right spirit of how that can lead to a better future for the people who are impacted by those decisions as well. If someone is not
Interesting.
performing, you cannot push it down the carpet and say, okay, it will get better tomorrow. You have
Right.
to call a spade a spade.
True.
What's important is then to lead them through that journey to say, what next? How can you do better?
Right. Right. Now, there is this age-old debate. It never kind of truly dies, and that is IQ versus EQ. What is more important? But I think to a greater or lesser extent, we all have come to the realization and understanding that IQ is undeniably important. It is relevant, But do you think EQ sometimes takes over from there or becomes the true differentiator when you talk about effective versus less effective leaders?
You are in the talent business, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm sure you will vouch that it's important that when somebody steps out to look for talent, they look for somebody who is even smarter than themselves or better than themselves. Now, why would someone who is smarter than you work for you if EQ were not to be the deciding criteria? If IQ were to be the criteria, why would a smarter person ever work for someone who's less smarter than?
Right. Right.
So I think EQ being primary, EQ plus IQ combination, yeah, one or the other doesn't work, right?
Right.
A good combination for leadership has always been EQ, whether it is for inspiring people, whether it is for showing the purpose behind the organization's vision, for leadership, for vision, for inspiration. A high quotient on the EQ is necessary.
Interesting. Do you think that also kind of starts to assume greater importance as one starts to go through higher levels of responsibilities and leadership?
Absolutely, it does.
Okay, interesting. This is one of my favorite quotes that I've read from Daniel Goleman, who said that, CEOs are hired for their intellect and business expertise, but they are usually or often fired for the lack of emotional intelligence, which I think is reasonably true. But do you think across organizations, and more relevant to today's context, or in the last few years, organizations are consciously bringing EQ as one of the key measures of defining, who do you hire, who, for succession planning or even for promotion decisions? Do you think that is coming into play a lot more now?
Yeah, it may be called by different names in different companies. Some people may have it embedded in their values, some may have it in their competencies or the way in which they do their selection programs.
Right.
But undeniably, it is getting more and more weightage as the time goes by, especially since there is so much of fusion of functional expertise and of cross-divisional, cross-industry talent movement. So obviously, you're coming in with someone who doesn't necessarily know the entire details of a certain industry, but is still able to very successfully lead the organization, lead change. It's about being able to connect, being able to understand the pulse of where the market is and where our people need to go into that journey. It's a combination of these three. Like you need processes, you need technology and infrastructure, you need people. I mean, the other two by themselves will not work. I mean, the engine that gets those other two to work are the people, the mindsets, the culture that you develop in the company to be able to, overcome those challenges in the marketplace. So increasingly, whether it is for promotions or it is for external hiring, this is certainly embedded into either the company's values or competencies or selection criteria.
Interesting. Now, you've had a fantastic career and professional journey, spans nearly 3 decades, like I said at the beginning of our discussion. But reflecting back, can you think of instances or examples that kindly really stayed back with you and also kind of taught you the importance or reaffirmed the importance of emotional intelligence and has in many ways been instrumental in helping you shape as an effective leader? I mean, could you point to any of those?
We're all work in progress. So the 3 decades notwithstanding, I think I'm still work in progress, and I learn through such incidents practically every day. And there are several incidents which have helped me, make a shift and become even greater aware of myself. So that self-awareness is. So I recall a certain incident which had me lose face in the organization for something that happened in my department. It had a very deep impact on me, and for several weeks I was unhappy with myself for having let something like that happen. Yeah.
Right.
I got some counseling from my then boss to say, see, this was supposed to happen the way it happened. I mean, you or anybody else in that slot could not have made too much difference. Yeah, maybe left or right, something may have gone the other way. But you're beating yourself up too hard, it's probably not required. Yeah.
Right.
That conversation actually helped me a lot. Yeah. But even then, it took me several months. And I'll tell you, during those months, what happened with me. I would be less trustful of people. It would not be easy or quick for me to make decisions. I would take time because I didn't want to make a mistake.
Right.
I would worry to see if now that there's been such a thing that has happened in my team or my function, if another one were to happen, what would it mean to my career? Yeah,
right.
And what would it mean to the image of my function? And I brooded over this, and it did mean that my colleagues around me started noticing a different me. Yeah, as someone who was less patient, someone who asked many more questions, someone who was also becoming a little rude and nasty at times, which was not seen to be my general nature.
Right.
So to catch myself in that, it took me a few months, but that incident certainly helped me in future. Now this is several years ago. So
right.
every time I see that I go in that direction, and whether I've not made a trustful decision now, or have I said something in a certain way, my self-awareness is a lot more, and I seem to be catching it almost immediately after doing something like that. So we are all people, and everybody will lose it every once in a while. So someone, it's okay to be not okay. That's an important message for leaders as well, because mental health has a toll on everybody. The higher you are in the system, the more pressures and stressors you have, and it's okay sometimes to let it off, but it's very, very important to catch yourself in that moment as soon as you can. Have good mechanisms for mirroring it to you, especially with the people around you who can then say that this is what is happening. Or reflect more on yourself and catch yourself doing it quickly and make efforts. 99% of the time you can still work around it.
Right.
1%, I think that 1% will make all the difference whether things move forward or backward. Those 1%, I think one has to be extremely watchful and career and oriented around it. But 99% of the time, if you catch yourself in that moment, you can prevent it from happening. If you can't prevent it from happening, you can certainly, with humility and engagement, turn it around.
Harish, wonderful, wonderful session with you. And thank you for sharing such thoughtful perspectives, such interesting anecdotes and your experiences. It's been an absolute pleasure having a discussion with you on this subject. And I look forward to many more such probable engagements coming in the future. But thank you for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Manish. Absolute pleasure. Enjoyed it. Thank you.